My boss fired me for underperforming, even though I made 40% fee of their revenue. What happened the next day shocked them. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. When was the last time someone made a decision about your life without understanding anything about the work you've poured into it? The kind of decision that's handed to you cold and quiet across a polished table with a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Maybe it was a layoff, maybe a betrayal, maybe someone saying, "It's just business," as if that makes it easier. If you felt that sting even once, then what happened to me might hit a little too close to home. It was a Friday morning in late October, the kind of cold where you could see your breath before you even opened the office door. I was called into a meeting with Brian Ellsworth, our new VP of Sales. He had that clipped energy, polished shoes, fresh haircut, rehearsed confidence. He didn't offer coffee, didn't ask about the kids, just motioned to the chair across from him. "We need hungrier talent," he said, his voice as flat as the Manitoba prairie. "The company is moving in a new direction." Then he slid the envelope across the table, as if it didn't contain the end of nearly a decade of my life. No thank you, no handshake, just performance metrics and buzzwords. I'd seen it coming. You can feel these things before they arrive. My name is Noah Mercer. I'm 46 years old. I spent the last 9 years as senior account executive at Triana Corp based in Winnipeg, and I'd built a client base that accounted for nearly 40% of our company's total revenue. Not that any of that mattered in the new direction. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, slightly nodded once, and left his office without a sound. Sometimes silence is louder than outrage. At my desk, I started packing the contents of a career into a cardboard box. A photo of my daughter at her high school graduation. The mug my son gave me when he was 6 that said "World's Okayest Dad." A plant that had somehow survived 5 office moves. And a private folder, handwritten notes, backup contacts, client birthdays, things I kept off the company CRM. Not because I was hiding them, just because that's how trust is built. I didn't make eye contact with anyone as I walked out. Didn't want pity or small talk. Valerie, from accounting, passed by. "Are you moving offices?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I gave her a half smile. "Something like that," I replied, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I found myself standing shoulder to shoulder with Everett Stanton, our CEO. He didn't say a word, just scrolled through his phone, oblivious. It was strangely fitting. He had no idea what Brian had just done, or what it would cost the company in a matter of days. But I knew. And I wasn't angry, not yet, just clear. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. No podcasts, no calls. Just the hum of the highway and the steady rhythm of breath. I thought about everything I'd built, contracts that took years of dinners, flights, weekends away from home. Trust I'd earned client by client, handshake by handshake. Brian hadn't just fired an employee today. He'd cut the rope holding their biggest accounts together. He just didn't know it yet. When I got home, the house was empty. My wife, Rebecca, was in Vancouver for the week helping her sister with a newborn. The silence felt sacred. I placed the box on the kitchen counter and stared out the window at the backyard where I'd built the deck with my own hands. 9 years of missed dinners, weekend flights, red-eye returns, just to be told I wasn't hungry enough. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in the stillness watching the sun slip below the trees. My phone buzzed. Travis Hendress, one of my biggest clients, was confirming dinner for next Thursday. Annual contract renewal. Waller, 7 million account. He didn't know yet. None of them did. And that's when it clicked. There's a particular kind of peace that comes when the worst already happened, and you realize you're still standing. Not out of luck, but because somewhere deep down you were ready. That night, I didn't rage. I didn't write emails. I didn't call anyone. I just opened my laptop, scrolled through my personal contacts, and took a long, quiet look at the names of every client who ever trusted me more than they trusted the company I worked for. And in that moment, I made a decision. I'd sleep tonight. No alarm, no early flights, no anxiety about Monday morning meetings. But tomorrow, I'd make exactly 3 phone calls, not to ask for anything, just to tell the truth. And then I'd let the dominoes fall. The next morning, the sun poured into the kitchen like it didn't know anything had changed. That was the strange part, how the world just kept going. The coffee still brewed. The birds still landed on the fence. But inside, I felt different, calmer, sharper, like something had snapped into place while I slept. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, and scrolled to Travis's number. I took a deep breath and hit dial. He answered on the second ring. Noah. Hey, looking forward to dinner next week. I didn't stall. I won't be with Triana anymore. As of yesterday, they let me go. The pause on the other end was heavy. Then, wait, what? Why I gave him the short version. New VP. Said they want people who chase new business instead of growing existing accounts. He exhaled sharply. You built our contract. You've been the only reason we've stayed through some of the headaches. Who's handling us now? Could be Brian himself, or a new hire named Alicia Winters. Either way, you deserve to know directly. He went quiet. I let the silence sit there like a test. Finally, he said, thanks for calling. And Noah, let me know where you land, all right. Next was James Henderson. Different tone. Direct, sharp. James had been my client for 6 years and a friend for 3. When I told him the news, he said, they fired you, are they drunk? I chuckled. Apparently, they're just forward-thinking. Whoever takes over my account, he said, better not screw up the quarterly review. But I'll say this, if you end up anywhere else, I want to be the first to know. The last call was to Peter Carlton. A bit more cautious, more measured. He listened. He processed. Then he said, my team signed with Triana because of you, Noah. Not because of some quarterly email from head office. That was it. 3 calls. No begging. No bitterness. Just clarity. By noon, word had spread. My phone lit up with texts from numbers I hadn't seen in months. Former coworkers, vendor reps, even a few clients I hadn't spoken to since last year. Some just sent question marks. Others sent, heard what happened. Unreal. At 2:04 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was Everett Stanton. I didn't answer. He left a message. Noah, this is Everett. We need to talk about your transition. Several clients have called. They're concerned. Please call me back today. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Your transition, he'd said, like I was a line item, a box to check. Instead, I made a different call, one I'd been holding back for years. Lawrence Finch was a quiet guy, an employment lawyer who I'd helped once back when his son-in-law was launching a cafe and needed investors. I didn't expect him to remember, but he did. I told him everything, from the new VP's arrival to the commission changes to the sudden dismissal. Lawrence listened. Then he said something simple. They can't stop you from working, he told me, but they'll try to scare your clients from following you. You need to be careful. Strategic. I thanked him and hung up. By late afternoon, the company's legal department had emailed me citing confidentiality obligations and reminding me of my non-solicitation clause. I read every word. Then I read it again. They were bluffing because they knew. They knew those relationships were never theirs to begin with. At 5:12 p.m., Brian texted, "Noah, we should discuss your exit package. There might be room for consulting work if you're open to it." I put the phone down without replying. At 5:34, Travis sent another text. "Just got off the phone with your old VP. They're offering us a discount on renewal, 10% off. Said Alicia would handle it personally." I didn't say anything. Then a second message. I told them I'd think about it. "But Noah, just tell me where you're headed. Because wherever you go, that's where we're taking our business." And I realized something. They weren't following me out of loyalty. They were following because they finally saw what I'd known all along. The relationship had never been about a logo or a downtown address. It had always been about trust, about consistency, about showing up when it counted. I closed my laptop, set my phone face down, poured myself a glass of water, and smiled for the first time that day because the pieces were already moving. And I wasn't chasing revenge. I was building something else. The next morning felt different. Not because anything dramatic had happened overnight, but because something inside me had settled. Not anger, not even ambition. Just this quiet resolve that I was done letting other people steer the wheel of my life. I opened the blinds. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, illuminating the stack of printed client contracts I'd kept for years. Just copies. Nothing proprietary. Just reminders of the people I'd helped grow, helped survive economic dips and last-minute cancellations. The people who mattered. And then my phone rang. It wasn't a client. It wasn't Brian. It was someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years. Michael Grantley, president of a rival firm. Smaller than Triana, but steadier, old school. No games. "Noah," he said like we'd spoken yesterday. "I heard the news. Seems your former employer just made their biggest mistake in a decade." I smiled faintly. News travels fast. In this town, it travels before you even hit send. There was a pause. Not awkward strategic. "I want to make you an offer," he said. "Executive VP. Full autonomy. Bring your book. Manage your way. We'll back you, and we'll pay to make it worth your while." It hit me harder than I expected. Not the title, not even the money, just the simplicity of it. Respect, no conditions, no committees, just, "We see your worth." I told him I needed a day, but I already knew. By noon, the fallout had begun. Julia, my former assistant, texted from a personal number. Brian's in full meltdown mode, she wrote. Everett's asking how no one saw this coming. 8 clients have terminated so far. Travis, Carlton, Henderson, 2 more this morning. And just like that, the storm Brian thought he controlled had moved beyond his reach. They'd assumed I'd go quietly, that I'd fade out, rebrand myself as another over 40 has-been in sales trying to stay relevant in a young and hungry market. But I wasn't hungry. I was fed, full of experience, relationships, patterns. And I'd built something they never took the time to understand. At 3:11 p.m., I received a second call, this time from Everett. I let it go to voicemail again. Noah. This is Everett. Look, I know things got messy, but I'd like to talk man to man. Just us. No Brian, no legal. You've got half our revenue walking out the door. And frankly, we need a plan. He sounded tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from long nights, but from realizing you backed the wrong horse and bet your whole career on it. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Michael. Told you I needed a day, I said, and I took a slow breath. I'm in. He didn't celebrate, didn't cheer, just said the words I'd needed to hear for years. Welcome home. That night, I pulled a box out of the closet. Inside were cards, notes, printed emails from clients over the years, thank yous, holiday wishes, photos of newborns and ribbon cuttings. They weren't trophies. They were reminders that people don't stay because of strategy decks or pitch slogans. They stay because someone showed up when it mattered, and that someone had always been me. I didn't sleep that night, not from stress, but from energy, that strange electric kind that hums under your skin when you know a page is turning. And this time, you're the one flipping it. At 6:15 a.m., I poured myself a black coffee, stepped out onto the balcony, and watched as the skyline slowly lit up. Quiet streets, winter air, the city waking up to just another Tuesday. But for me, it wasn't just another day. It was the day I became more than what they'd allowed me to be. Michael had set the onboarding meeting for noon, downtown, Grantley & Co. Not the flashiest firm, but they had something rarer than a big lobby or flashy titles. They had character. And character, unlike revenue, can't be faked on a spreadsheet. Before I headed out, I opened my laptop. I wasn't planning to take anyone, not directly, but I needed to know who still cared, who still remembered how I'd fought for their accounts when no one else did. I sent one email, one line. Just wanted you to know I've moved on, and I'm grateful for every step we took together. No pitch, no company name, no links, just truth. By the time I arrived at the Grantley building, I had 14 replies. Some short, some long, but all of them said the same thing. We trust you, not the company, not the logo, not the infrastructure, me. And that truth hit deeper than I expected. In the lobby, Michael shook my hand firmly. Ready to build, I nodded. Then, let's give them something worth losing sleep over. That afternoon, while I was still being introduced to the team, I got a message from Julia. She attached a screenshot. It was Brian, an internal memo. He was blaming the client fallout on unprecedented market volatility, said it had nothing to do with my departure. Of course he did. He couldn't afford to admit what everyone already knew, that you can't fire the bridge and expect the river not to flood. At 3:30 p.m., I met with Grantley's legal team. We reviewed my old contract. The non-compete clause was flimsy, unenforceable after involuntary termination. They agreed I was clean, and that meant something important. I didn't need to poach clients. They were already finding their way. By day's end, 3 had reached out to Grantley through back channels. No push, no persuasion, just gravity. Because trust, once earned, has its own momentum. On my way home, I stopped by a small restaurant on Queen Street, the kind where you know the owner's name, and they still remember your order from a year ago. It was where I used to take clients when I actually wanted to talk, not perform. I sat by the window, alone, not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I ordered dinner slowly. No rush, no deadlines, no shallow small talk with someone trying to replace me. Halfway through the meal, I looked out onto the street. It was dusk, snow falling in soft spirals, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until that exact moment. They hadn't just fired me, they freed me. Not from work, but from compromise. From becoming someone I no longer recognized, just to survive under someone else's vision. Now, I was building something of my own, maybe smaller, maybe quieter, but mine, and that after everything was enough. The next morning, I stood by the window of my new office. Not as grand as the last one, no corner view, no custom desk, but the light felt warmer here, and something in me had shifted. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not titles, not recognition, not their approval. I was planting. Michael stepped in with a grin. 8 clients confirmed, he said. 3 more in legal review. You've turned the place electric. I smiled quiet, steady, because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about finally doing something right on my own terms. Later that day, a courier arrived with a familiar envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside, a handwritten note from Everett Stanton. Darren, we miscalculated. You weren't just part of the company. You were the foundation. We're losing more than clients, we're losing our compass. If you're ever open to a conversation, no lawyers, just coffee, I'd appreciate the chance to apologize. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my drawer. Some apologies matter more than others, and this one I wasn't ready for. By Thursday, the ripple had become a wave. The financial press picked up on the exodus. Headlines started appearing. Trevance quarter crumbles as top clients walk. Industry shock. McCabe move reshapes regional market. Trust or transaction. A sales veteran redefines value. I didn't share the links. I didn't need to. But I kept one screenshot on my desktop. Just a reminder. Sometimes, the truth gets loud without you raising your voice. A week later, I stood in a boardroom at Grantley with 2 account managers I had just hired. Younger, eager, but raw. They reminded me of me years ago, before the layers, before the politics, just hunger and hope. I handed them each a list. Nothing fancy, just notes from old clients. Don't memorize these, I said. Learn their lives, their kids' names, their worries, the quiet way they say yes when they feel safe. That's the real business. They nodded, unsure, but listening. It was the first time I felt it, not just as a survivor, but as a mentor, a builder, a leader who finally had the space and freedom to shape something lasting. The next day, I ran into Brian Ellsworth at the Financial Services Forum downtown. He looked thinner, harsher around the edges, the kind of tired you don't sleep off. He pretended not to see me. I let him pretend. Some things don't need closure. They just need distance. At lunch, Travis called. I just signed the longest contract of my career with you, he said, laughing. You good, Darren. I looked out the window at the gray Toronto sky, the kind that used to make the old me restless. I'm finally exactly where I'm supposed to be, I told him. And I'm building something I don't have to fear losing. He paused, then said something I'll never forget. You didn't lose, Darren. You lit a match. They just didn't expect the fire to walk away. That night, I drove home and passed the old Trevant building. The lights were off on the 8th floor. Rumor was they were downsizing. But I didn't slow down, didn't take a picture, didn't feel anything, because the past had already let go of me. Back home, Rebecca handed me a coffee. Our son had a game the next morning. I'd be there this time. No missed flights, no emergency calls, just real life, whole and waiting. And as I sat beside her on the couch, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't the client poaching, wasn't the headlines, wasn't even the pay raise. It was this peace, the kind that comes when you stop trying to be valued and start knowing what you're worth. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or quietly replaced, remember, Darren, you don't need to fight louder. You just need to build better. And when you do, the world will notice without you having to say a word.